Hi, everybody. I'm Jon Bergmann.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melinda Mestre.
Today, we want to talk about flipped mastery learning. So, Melinda, tell me more about your flipped mastery journey.
Sure. When I was about oh, 14 years ago, when I was an early career teacher, I came across your work, actually, Jon, and it revolutionized the way I started to teach because I felt that it not only helped my students develop their academic skills, but it really helped them with their soft skills, such as thinking and self regulation and reflection. So for me, it completely transformed the way I taught entirely.
And I want to share with you guys that I've recently completed a book about the topic of flipped mastery learning. It's not quite out yet. It'll be out in early 2022. But Melinda played a key role. I interviewed teachers from all over the world, and she was one of the experts that I talked to. And so I encourage you to look forward in getting that book. You may not realize this, but flipped mastery learning starts with this guy named Benjamin Bloom. And you're familiar with some of the taxonomy stuff, but Benjamin Bloom in 1984 wrote a paper, this paper right here, where he wants to solve what's called the double sigma or the two sigma problem, where he challenged the world to find a way of teaching that's just as effective as one-on-one tutoring. And if you look at this graph right here, he compared three ways that you teach: the conventional model, mastery model, and then one-on-one tutoring. I think notice that if you get one standard deviation improvement if you do mastery learning, and two if you do the double sigma, if you can have one-on-one tutoring. But this is what he said in the paper, I think quite fascinating. He said, if the research on the two sigma problem yields practical methods that the average teacher or school faculty can learn in a brief period of time and use with little more cost or time than conventional instruction, catch this part, it would be an educational contribution of the greatest magnitude. It would change popular notions about human potential and would have significant effects on what schools can and should do with the educational years that each society requires of its young people. This was like a clarion call to educators to say, dude, is there a way that we could do this relatively simple where we could get double sigma results? And then we need to do this. So, Melinda, is what we're talking about a two sigma answer?
Seems to be, absolutely. I think that by taking hold of this research and making a practical approach for us in the classroom is the answer.
Yeah. See, we're marrying a couple things here. Mastery learning, right? And one-on-one tutoring are merged together in a regular class. So you teach regular classes like I do. I teach lots of classes. I have lots of students in my class. You'll see images of my classes a little bit later, and it just works, right? All right, so we have solved
Absolutely.
this problem. This is crazy. This is really crazy, guys. We're making
I
an
know.
audacious claim that we have solved the Bloom Sigma problem. That's crazy, right? So true. Now, the thing we want to now shift our focus is remember, we're saying it's the flipped mastery classroom. So we need to talk a little bit about flipped learning, and then we'll connect the mastery next. So in flipped learning, you've probably all seen this graph, right? This is Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy, knowledge up to creation. And let's be honest, for most classes, and I'm going to confess, this is how I started teaching in 1986, is I spent most of my time here at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy doing the lecture thing. And then I spent very little time at the top of Bloom's taxonomy. Was that your experience, Melinda?
Yeah, absolutely. I found that early on in that sort of conventional, traditional classroom, I was spending time doing stuff in the classroom that was just the remembering and the understanding. And then I was sending kids home to do the hard stuff, like the application and the analyzing, the evaluating on their own. But do you know how many times kids came back to school and said, Miss, I couldn't finish my homework because I just couldn't understand it.
So
And
the idea of
that's
flipped
the
learning,
situation, yeah.
yeah, and the idea of flipped learning is we just take Bloom's taxonomy and we flip it on its head, right? And in fact, we think the
That's
ideal
right.
shape is this diamond shape. I mean, you look at the diamond shape, we think the vast majority of your class time should be spent in the, if you will, in the middle of Bloom's taxonomy. And but you still need information transfer. You need knowledge and understanding, and that's done kind of with these cheesy videos or some reading assignments that this pre-work the students are going to do, so that you could use the bulk of your class time for applying and understanding. And that's the idea. If you're just going to flip your classroom, it's awesome. By the way, research says it works. But if you want to take it to the next level, which we're trying to really encourage you to do, is to move to a mastery competency model. What you're going to find is that it works way better than that. I mean, really, people will say that the mastery model is like, flipped learning on steroids. It's learning on steroids, really. So, yeah. So we think this is the answer, that this is the answer, solving the Bloom's double sigma problem. And we want to now talk about what a flipped mastery classroom is. So what is a flipped mastery classroom? You got the flip piece. Let's add the mastery piece now. Let's take a look now into my classroom.
So, John, what I really loved about what I could see in your classroom is that students were doing different things based on where they were in their learning journey. Some students were at their desk doing some questions. Some students were at their benches doing practical work. You were moving around and speaking to those students, and I think it was really it really captured what a flipped mastery classroom looks like.
Yeah, it's like a 3 or a 6 ring circus, and you're constantly making decisions about who you're going to help. But the beauty is you get a chance to talk to every student in every class every day, and then you are helping them on their learning journey, which is slightly different. Some students move faster through the curriculum, and some students move less fast. I mean, the big gist of mastery, what is the big idea of mastery, right? Students, they get to the end of a unit or a cycle or whatever you want to call it, and then they take some kind of a summative test, and then some of them fail. What did you used to do when students failed, Melinda?
Well, before I was a flipped mastery convert. Well, conventionally you just moved straight along, didn't you? You didn't take time to remediate their learning.
Right. So which, in a mastery classroom, that's different. What happens differently in a mastery classroom?
Well, what happens differently in a mastery classroom is that students have the opportunity to go back, to reflect on where they went wrong, to do some more practice, and then take another formative assessment to see where they are in their learning journey. And if they have progressed, fantastic. If not, then they have the opportunity to go back, reflect, and do some more practice. And they can continue to do that until they have mastered their work.
And so this is, in fact, the mastery learning cycle that we're talking about. There's a mastery learning cycle. You can see the different stages. And the key one right here, you can see there's remediation. So they get to some point where they do some assessment, and then they have to remediate, and then they go back. They have to continue this cycle until they master the content. And the thing that's crazy, right, that people struggle with is the logistics, right? Now remember, Benjamin Bloom was a huge fan of mastery learning in 1984, let's say, actually before that even, 1970s and 1980s. But remember, the technology was just not there, right? If there was a direct instruction piece, how do you do that in 1984? Maybe a videotape, I don't know. But now with the ubiquitous nature of streaming online content that you can create, what that does is that frees you up. It actually not just frees you up, it multiplies you, where you could be having conversations with 20 people, different conversations at the same time. That's the crazy thing about that. And there's also actually the two things that threw off mastery, by the way, historically in the 1980s and that kind of a time frame was how do you multiply the teacher? And number two is assessment. How many versions of a test? So, I mean, if a student fails a test, how many you give them a second test and a third test and a 10th test and a 15th test? How do you do that? How do you keep test security? How does that all work? Well, guess what? Technology has solved these problems. So the problems that Ben Bloom had are solved. So as we're looking at the mastery learning cycle right here, one of the key elements that as I was writing the book, I discovered that it was really important is that we create a rubric that really spells out the specific learning objectives that a student has to reach. And this is one of the examples of the mastery learning rubric. Melinda, take it away.
Yeah, what I really like about this, and the mastery rubric is something that I am starting to cultivate with my own students. And what I love about this is that it not only goes through that sort of that Bloom's hierarchy from understanding through to application, but then looking at the rubric from, yeah, I'm sort of getting it, and this is what it looks like, through to I really get it, and this is what it looks like. And I think giving students that visual representation of this is what it looks like really helps them to understand where they are in their learning continuum.
And so what I do is I have students check off when they have an issue. Check this one off, check that. They're just moving through it. They know what the rules are. I need to get these things checked off. All right. 11 pillars of a flipped mastery classroom. So what does one look like? You've seen some images, and the video I think helped a lot, but let's talk about the hallmarks of it, or you will. The first one is what? What's number one?
Well, number one is no whole class instruction.
No whole class instruction? You can get away with that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, you can. And I think the beauty about this is it removes it being teacher-centered and makes it student-centered.
Yeah. I mean, you still have instruction. So I'm not saying you don't have any direct instruction. It's just moved to the independent space that are on these, if you will, these cheesy videos that you might make or whatever. Number two is that it has at a flexible pace. Now, this is actually a very important point. If you're saying students can move at their own pace, I don't know, Melinda, if this is your experience, but if you give students, say they can work at their own pace, I have some students who will have no pace.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of the benefits of using this approach is those students that have poorer processing skills are able to take the time to digest the information at home rather than feeling like they have to keep up with their peers. I find when you have a mixed ability class and you have some students that are getting it faster than others, it can make those students that have those poorer processing skills feel like they have to just keep up, and that's not good for their own self-confidence. So giving them the time and the space to be able to process and digest that information at home, I think is really important.
Yeah, you are so correct. Yeah. Next one is it allows for extreme differentiation. And I mean extreme differentiation. The students will work. It's unbelievable the amount of opportunities that you're going to have as a teacher as you walk around the room to help your students. Help us with number 4.
So with number 4, that teacher-student interaction. So, Jon, my role as a teacher is the expert to provide guidance based on where students are in their learning, not where I think they should be based on the minute that we're in the lesson. So I spend my time walking around the classroom, interacting with students, but I'm always in formative assessment mode. I'm checking for understanding. I'm asking questions of students. I'm having students ask questions of me, and I am making, like you said before, those quick decisions on where students are in their learning and what they need next.
And that's my role. I see my role as a roamer. Number 5, what happens, as you can see, is you have collaborative work. It's hard to not do a flipped mastery classroom. I've never been in one, and I've been in a lot of them. It's just the students aren't working in some collaborative sense, and they work together. And sometimes, like with the extreme differentiation, these are kind of connected. I had a group of students just a couple of days ago who are my struggling students, and I identified them and said, no, they didn't all like work together. They were in all different parts of the room, and I said, you, and you, called them up by name, pulled them up to one of the whiteboards in the room and said, let's work on these difficult problems that you're struggling with. And we sat at the board, and they became a group. In fact, that group, I actually split. I realized that I had sort of one group that was a little bit more advanced than another, and I split them, and I worked more with the if you will, the students who were struggling the most, and the students who were a little bit more advanced. I helped them less, but they were all, about a day and a half behind their peers, something like that. And I said, all right, we need to get you guys caught up. You guys need some extra one-on-one attention. And we had a collaborative group, but it was forced. I forced them into the group because they all needed each other's help. Number 6. I guess you've already talked about this, right, Melinda?
Yeah, but I think you know, as we're walking around the room and we're gathering that formative data, I think there's another aspect to it, right? So as students are moving through their learning, they are, certainly in my classroom, they're sitting little quizzes throughout. So I can then tailor what they next need in terms of getting their remediation on board. It allows me to deal with those misconceptions early, find out what further interventions are needed. I think with formative assessment, there's that qualitative formative assessment that we're getting from our observations, but there's also that quantitative formative assessment that we're gathering in those small little quizzes that we might be doing throughout, or like in your mastery rubric, there are certain checkpoints that they have to reach, right, as they're moving through their learning.
One thing I like to do is have the kids actually ask me questions. So as they are, they have to do a mastery check where they check one lesson's worth of material. And I'll say, ask me an interesting question. And actually what I find is that interesting question that they ask me reveals misconceptions, and I can clarify what their issues are.
That's right. That's right.
Oops, that mastery rubric's there. Now, summative assessments. How do you do summative assessments? That's sort of a big question in a mastery learning classroom.
Well, it looks very different in a flipped mastery classroom compared to a traditional one, Jon, doesn't it?
Yeah, so for my classes, what my students do is if you remember back the mastery rubric, I had 3 levels of mastery. And so what I've actually done, this has been the new project this year, is I'm writing 3 different leveled tests. One that demonstrates basic understanding, and then one clear understanding, and one deep understanding. What that's allowed me to do, and I got this all from writing the book, and actually the big idea came from a Finnish professor who I interviewed for the book. And one of the rubs about mastery learning, if you look at the research of Benjamin Bloom and all these people who've researched it, Thomas Guskey, have all talked about how really it helps the struggling students to get better, but oftentimes it doesn't challenge the more advanced students. But with this model, what I have is students who want to achieve the deepest level of mastery. I can really, really challenge them. And so I've had to write, particularly what I've had to do is take my summative assessments, and now I can write the really difficult, much more deep level questions, and the students who want to achieve that can aim for that.
In my classroom, it looks a little bit differently in the sense that we still have our traditional summative assessment at the end that the whole cohort sits, because that's just the nature of our curriculum. But what I do in my classroom is that I set those formative assessments tiered in a very similar way in which you've just described. And I know that if a student gets to, task 4 that has, X questions in it, that they have achieved where I need them to be at.
But what I have done in these level tests is I've created thousands of versions. So actually every time a student sits for a summative test, they get a different test. And the way you do that is with learning management systems. I happen to use Desire to Learn's Brightspace. I know it's around Australia right now, but there's a lot of platforms that do this. I create folders, and the folders are individual objectives at a certain level. So I've got, like, I call it 3.2 basic, 3.2 clear, 3.2 deep, and I'll write 6 or 8 questions for each of them. And when they sit for the exam, the computer will randomly pick one of those questions. So that way, if they have to take it again because they don't pass it, so to speak, then they will get a different question. So they're not just memorizing the test, they're learning the content that way. And I find this to just be so powerful with my students. Again, I'm not sure it works as well from a summative, but I could surely see how that technique would work really well with formative checks that you would do in your class, Melinda.
Yeah, I have access to platforms such as Education Perfect and Cognity, which do very similar things to the Brightspace application that you use, and also through our school learning management system, Schoology, we can also do something similar. So we tend to use those platforms, and you can randomize those questions, which makes it really easy.
All right, and immediate feedback. I think this is maybe one of the most powerful things that I get to do each day is the student. You can see an image right here of a student of mine, and this is actually right after she has taken a summative, and we're going over her summative right away. Since not all the students are taking the summative on the same day, and they're staggered, then what happens is I can go over and clear up misconceptions. And actually, this becomes also my remediation time, right? Remember the mastery check with the remediation. When they get remediated, they need, well, what are you going to do? Well, I need to diagnose their problem. I need to figure out what is it that they don't understand. And then I need to give them a plan so that they can learn what they didn't learn so that when they retake the summative, they will be successful.
So with my students, I get them to complete a reflection table, and they have to identify those questions that they got wrong and the areas that it relates to. And then they have to come up with how a solution. So how are they going to remediate that? And then once they've done that table, we sit down together and we look at it together, and I give them some strategies on where they can go, what they can be doing to meet the solutions that they had come up with themselves. I find that getting the students involved in that remediation and reflection adds to the development of that soft skill of reflection and self-regulation, where they can take ownership of their learning. And part of that is taking ownership of where they went wrong and how they are going to fix it. So I think that's a really important part of this whole cycle.
I should add that to my class. That's I have a reflection piece, and I do it a little bit differently, but I see yours is a little bit more intentional. In my class, I have an alarm that's set with 5 minutes left to the end of class, and then the expectation is that they pull out their laptops and they have a form that they fill out every day, and it's a reflection. And I have them basically answer two questions. Question number one, what did you learn today? And number two, what's the next step for your learning journey? So that helps them prepare and take ownership. But you're actually even being more intentional than I am about what specific issue and target do you need. Yeah, that's good. I need to like incorporate that. That's yeah. No,
the end of lesson reflection form is quite important because we do it through OneNote, and that way I can go in and I can see what they've written and I can give them tips back, and we can have a full conversation through that reflection sheet, where they then come back in the next lesson, they see what I've written, and they can go, oh, okay, so Mrs. suggested I should do this, or yeah, I agree with what Mrs. said, and we can continue that dialogue even when I'm not even in the room. And so I think that's such an important part, is that dialogue and that reflection process.
And number 10, it's often gamified. So one thing that I'm doing, guys, is that, and I'm not like crazy gamification. I actually call my tests boss battles, and my lessons are missions. But the thing you can see, this is an image of the leaderboard. I just have a leaderboard, and the students, when they accomplish a mission, which is a lesson, they just move their marker across. The kids love it. So I don't know, Melinda, your thoughts on gamification?
Yeah, I think that's awesome. This is actually one area that I am in the process of developing. Flipped Mastery is a long process in developing, and this is sort of the one that I'm at the moment. So I really like that idea. I think I'm going to take that one on board.
Yeah. And then the last one is the most important. It's all about relationships. I just know my students better. I know their cognitive abilities and what they're struggling with, but sometimes I have the privilege and the honor that they'll share more about, the struggles in their life. Good teaching's good when kids know that you care. Right, Melissa?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that that research says that students learn best when they're in classes with their teacher that is not just interested in their academic achievement, but also believes in them, right? So I think this process allows for that to happen. And as you're roaming around and you're having that extra time to interact, you're having that opportunity to develop those more positive learning relationships with them.
Yeah. So Melinda, what are some thoughts, just advice for the teacher who's like, I'm just getting started? What advice do you have for her or for him?
I think just start with flipping the switch. Start with just flipping the classroom so students are learning at home and then applying in the classroom. For me personally, that's where I started. And I know, John, the research says that we should be making our own videos. Students learn best when they hear it in their teacher's voice. But I think for me personally, that was quite daunting to start with. So what I did was I found another teacher on YouTube that was using the same curriculum as I was. And I introduced that teacher as a team teacher to my class. So they knew that this was the voice that they were going to be hearing at home. And the two of us, we taught chemistry or we taught science together. And for me, that released that burden of thinking I had to create all of these content videos when, I just didn't have the time to do it. And it allowed me time to focus on some of the other areas that I wanted to in the classroom, that application and started to think about more of that mastery as I went along. But that did take a number of years to get to that point.
And I would just concur. The pattern I've seen with teachers across the world is that this is step one. You start by flipping your class, and then maybe then you move to mastery. It takes time to develop this. This changes your focus on away from student or from teacher-centered learning to student-centered learning, and mastery is like a 2-year process. I'm working with a teacher, a young teacher right now, and she wants to move to mastery. She says, I'm into mastery, but as I've consulted with her, I've said, no, you need to just flip your class this year. You've got too much going on. There's no way. In fact, she's using my videos mostly, but gonna use some of her own. She's got to build them. So it's like a 50-50 thing right now. The students now want to talk to me as they say, hey, can we Skype them in or whatever? So we're gonna do something like that. But my advice, guys, you can do this. This will transform your classroom. It will transform your life. And I really encourage you guys to get a chance if you can. I mean, Melinda's doing amazing work there in Australia. Go visit her class if you can. Talk her principal and or her head of school, whatever, to let you come visit. You will be amazed. So, yeah, Melinda, any last thoughts?
Oh, I just want to thank you, John. If I hadn't read your book all those years ago, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I really must thank you, and I want to thank the time that you have given me personally in this flipped learning, flipped mastery journey. So thank you so much. We look forward to hearing questions from everybody, so keep them coming in. And we look forward to engaging with you after the session.
We'll talk. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye.